love goes on, softly on. So don't be sighing or crying. Here live with our
All right, welcome to another Lawyers, Guns, and Money podcast. This one will, in fact, be about Game of Thrones, unlike other recent ones, which have had the temerity to not be. I'm Scott R. Kaufman, SEK. This is Steve Attewell.
Hello.
And today we'll be talking about the second episode of the first season of Game of Thrones, The Kingsroad, which is an episode that many people hate because nothing happens and it's very boring, which is strange because quite a bit happens, and although some of it is inscrutable, especially if you're watching it for the first time, it's never really boring. And we're going to try to convince you of that over the course of the next hour.
There's actually a lot of stuff that there's individual scenes that people love that just happen to be in this episode. And, people, for some reason, disassociate the fact that, Tyrion slapping the crap out of Joffrey is in this episode. Even though they love that sequence. For some reason, they don't realize it's in this episode.
Yeah, and that's a great place to start, because I think if we want to find a way to kind of see an overarching theme to this episode, one of them would be where it begins and it ends, which is with the sort of public humiliation of Joffrey. And it begins with Tyrion waking up in a barn. I mean, he wakes up in a barn. Joffrey is leering over him. We get this close-up from a low angle. Joffrey is obviously playing the part of the prince. Very, very powerful, leering over him, and Tyrion stands up and proceeds to order him around. And if you think about how amazing that scene is, it's the guy who woke up in a barn, standing up and ordering his future king around. And then when his future king refuses his advice, he slaps the shit out of him. Not once, not twice, but 3 times.
And kind of effortlessly, kind of imposes his will on both Joffrey and the Hound, who is, a 7-foot tall, one of the best swords in the kingdom, and someone who really doesn't like Tyrion.
No. But he also he also really doesn't like Joffrey. I mean, and even
but
even
it's
warns
his job
Tyrion, right? He says, "Don't the little prince will remember this." And Tyrion's like, "Whatever."
Yeah, but it is interesting that the fraternity of cripples, bastards, and broken things does not extend to Sandor Clegane.
It is, and although that might be part of their sort of unspoken relationship at that moment. And what's really ironic is that immediately after that scene, Tyrion goes to breakfast and he
is ordering
he discusses,
everyone around.
He
just enters
is.
the room giving breakfast orders to just everybody in sight, to almost to the air, and be like, because I am Tyrion Lannister, food will appear before me. And then proceeds to kind of, dominate the table.
He does, but Jaime says something very, I think, telling. He says, even if the boy lives, he'll be a cripple, a grotesque. Give me a clean death any day.
Yeah.
Which is obviously...
wah wah.
Yeah.
The dramatic irony was not apparent to non-book readers until this season, but there you go. That's why this is funny.
Yes, and it's a moment where I think the future relationship between Jaime and Tyrion is being sort of sketched out, because Jaime is going to have to realize that he does not in fact want a clean death, that his will to survive is as strong as his brother's.
What's interesting is I just kind of realized looking at the scene right now, in the same way that last episode was or rather this episode is the last time that any of the Starks are going to see each other, this is kind of the last time in a long time that all of the, Lannister kids are going to be in the same room.
Yeah.
And
Rickon, not Rickon, sorry. The other two, they're not going to be sent off yet.
Yeah, but the funny thing is that by changing Jaime's return to King's Landing, they've actually, in season 3, they've actually moved it up a bit in the timeline, so it's happening earlier. We might be getting a very different kind of reunion and relationship. I'd be curious to see what kind of happens there in season 3.
Yeah, God damn it, February. To see where they're going with this, or I don't know, maybe George R. R. Martin will stop going on TV shows and finish writing the damn book by then, so we'll know more. But moving on, we cut from this scene to something that I think you should talk about, because in my notes I actually wrote Catelyn weaving that thing, ask Stephen about that thing again, and I think it's important that you sort of go into a little more detail as to what that is and the role that it plays later on, especially as we near the Red Wedding.
Yeah, so people have variously referred to this object as creepy medieval dream catcher. But if you look at it closely, and you can see it in a lot more detail in about 37, 30, it's called 34.
Yeah.
What it actually is a 7-pointed star. It is the symbol of the faith of the seven. And the little doll figures represent the 7 faces of the gods. So the father is at the top. I think that's the warrior next to him. And then the maiden to either side. Anyway, the larger point is, this is some, in a world in which we've seen a lot more of, say, R'hllor or the old gods than the dominant faith in Westeros. Here we get a kind of a nice visual acknowledgement that the faith of the seven is quite real, and that a big part of Catelyn Stark's character is that she is a very devout follower of the seven who really believes that, her prayers have weight in the world.
Yeah, which is strange, since otherwise she's been terribly disappointed, as she, tells Ned in this episode, as she reminds Jon Snow repeatedly in this episode. But yeah, and we do see her making another of these, right?
Yeah.
And then right before the Red Wedding starts, as you noted in one of the previous podcasts, before they close those doors, before whichever Frey it is closes the door.
Lame Lothar.
Yeah. Before he does that, we see the same symbol carved in stone behind the doors, and it's almost as if they are being shut out of this room. And so it's really sort of indicative of what's becoming of Catelyn's faith. And one really interesting thing that I picked up in this episode, it's later on, and we'll circle back to it, or we'll circle back to the beginning of the episode in a second, but when Bran's attacked by the assassin, before he actually can do anything, he has Catelyn with a knife to her throat. And it's the first time we've seen that image of Catelyn Stark with a knife to her throat, except she's fighting. Yeah. Because she feels she has something to fight for. And it's sort of a heartbreaking distinction to make between that and what we see at the Red Wedding, where she has, when Robb falls, you see she's given up, and she's just...
Well, to her, all of her children are dead.
Yeah, and it's
gone.
It's sort of a horrifying and retrospective moment to see her fight.
And crucially, the wolf is not there to protect them.
And it makes me wonder if the Lannisters learn their lesson when trying to take out a Stark, make sure you get the wolves.
Yes, the Lannisters, because definitely the Lannisters sent the knife.
Well, it's Tyrion's knife, so there's no way it can't be
Yes.
the Lannisters. But at least part of that particular alliance that will crop up again.
Yeah.
Unless I'm completely wrong, I'm thinking it's still part of that larger. Anyway, we can get to that later.
It's the Reptoids.
Oh.
Or
Okay,
the Westerosi equivalent, which is Merlings. Have you heard of the Grand Merling conspiracy?
No, I have not heard of the Grand Merlin.
Okay, this is the like Game of Thrones fandom equivalent of the whole Reptoids conspiracy, which is basically Varys. The theory is Varys is not a eunuch; he's actually a merman in disguise, and that the mermen have been like manipulating the politics of Westeros and Essos for some grand conspiracy, which is never quite outlined. But it's one of those like big tinfoil hat theories within the fandom that just will not die after like almost 20 years now.
Wow. I have not come across that. The merman. Okay. How'd they get Tyrion's knife? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, sorry.
So anyway,
enough of my derailing.
To go back to what you were saying earlier about this being sort of a last time for a lot of these characters to see each other. We have this very stilted conversation between Jon Snow and Robb Stark where they seem to not. Right, it's right after Jon's had that incredibly uncomfortable conversation with Catelyn, and I think I'll sort of skip talking about the visuals there because in order to do that, I'm gonna have to lay that out. But it's a very complex visual scene. There's a lot of unspoken tension created, and it's sort of difficult. I don't want to just describe it, but the after effect is that when Jon comes down, Robb knows that Jon has gone to see Catelyn. Right. Because of the look on his face. And they have this weird, stilted exchange. Like, Robb wants to defend his mother, but loves Jon.
I don't know I'd see it as stilted. I mean, they're awkward around each other because they're teenage boys, and they're not allowed to express their emotions about, how much they're going to miss each other. But at the same time, there is this, like... and it gets to a relationship between Jon and Robb, which is in the books, which we don't really get to see in the show, which is... The two of them are very close, but they also have this natural rivalry about, which of them is the better rider, which is the better swordsman, which is better with the lance, etc. But at the end of the day, both of them kind of know that there's only one outcome to the rivalry, which is that Robb is going to be the Lord of the Manor and Jon Snow isn't. And there's this bit that's described in the books where, they're kind of doing the Westerosi equivalent of when kids pretend to be like famous sports stars when they're like throwing a ball around, except they're doing it with knights and everything. And they're sort of I'm Aemon the Dragon Knight, or I'm Aegon the Conqueror or whatever. And at one point Jon says, I'm the Lord of Winterfell. And Robb says, well, you can't be the Lord of Winterfell, my mom says. And I can see that hurt him at that moment. So kind of what we're seeing here is like Jon is Robb kind of doing a status check on Jon, sort of saying, was my mom a bitch to you? And Jon politely saying, no, she was nice. Because he doesn't want to make Robb feel bad that, Robb's mom hates Jon.
But they do this weird thing, and instead of seeing me, you should now be seeing a screenshot of the look right after they go, well, good luck, Snow. Same to you, Stark. And then there's this beat, and then we see Jon looking like this, and then if we just go forward, we should see this response that's very warm, and then they have what is legitimately a very tender hug.
Yes.
Like they these are two people who genuinely care about each other, and they went through the formalities of Stark and Snow. We know our
Yeah.
places.
I mean, I think it's also the
Just
kind
give
of
me a hug, bro. Like, just give
yeah.
me a hug.
It's they end up at the primacy of the emotional relationship after having to navigate a rather tricky kind of legal and familial relationship.
Exactly. And it's a especially moving moment knowing that this is it for them.
Yeah. Now, speaking of the awkward meeting between uh, John and Catelyn, I mean, one of the things that was a huge change from the books is that in the books at this moment, when John shows up on his way out the door, Catelyn turns to him and says, John, this should have been you.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable for John because it's one of the few times in his life she's ever referred to him by his name. And by that, I mean his first name.
Yes.
And, I can sort of, on the one hand, see why they took it out because, even before the show started, it was always one of the things that people who really dislike Catelyn's character point to as like the reason that she's awful and that people hate her. At the same time, there were a lot of people who were unhappy that it was taken out of the show because and why people were unhappy about Catelyn's monologue in I forget which episode of season 3 where she talks about Jon Snow. Is that in the books, Catelyn genuinely does not like this kid, and never really changes in her attitude about that at any time. And that's kind of part of what makes her, a human and imperfect character.
I think though in the show, and I've demonstrated this in a couple of posts that I linked to with the last podcast. We still get that sense of animus. We still get that hatred. It's just unspoken. There's by no means do you come out of these first 2 episodes thinking that Catelyn feels anything but unambiguous hatred towards John. And I think actually the book does a better job of, or I'm sorry, the show does a better job of making it seem irrational because of the way they set up John as the sort of caring older brother character, if we're thinking in sort of sitcom terms. By setting John up like that, it makes the injustice of Catelyn's hatred seem all the more unjust. And so in this episode and before this scene, we have that beautiful scene between John and Arya, where he bequeaths what she will name Needle.
Well, she names Needle right then and there.
Well, yeah, but he didn't give her because he said, all the best sorts of names. You have to name it. But he gives her the sword that will become Needle. And then there's this great moment that will be obviously echoed in the title of a later episode, which is remember to stick them with the pointy end. And it's just this lovely brotherly, sisterly, familial moment. And I say that maybe it's just because it's actually my sister's birthday today that I'm thinking, oh, that's such a tender thing that he's giving her this gift and then making a joke about it. But it's a really significant scene because next episode we're going to see a similar one.
Yeah.
When Ned finds Needle, and
and
this is sort of setting it up.
The interesting difference here is that in the books there's kind of this interesting thing where after she names it and they do the stick 'em with a pointy end thing, they simultaneously say, and remember, don't tell Sansa.
Yeah.
And which is a quick little bit, but it is you do get a sense of like Sansa is the goody and a bit of a narc, in relationship to the other kids.
Yeah, and we're certainly going to get that at the end of the episode, with her not even narking, but bearing false witness. I think we should move on now to
Okay.
talking. I guess the one last thing I would say about the characters kind of seeing each other for the last time is there's actually this really great shot when right after Ned tells Jon that next time we see each other we'll talk about your mother.
Oh,
and then
yes, which
rides
that's a great
away.
rule of survival in Westeros is never, ever, ever, ever leave anything unsaid.
Yeah.
That's plot important. Like, always just say immediately everything you know that could be important to the other person.
Because this is it. But there's this great moment where Jon is looking at Ned riding away, and then he's looking at the party going north, but he's actually standing there, and everyone is leaving him. Like, we got the party going north.
Yeah.
We got that going, and Jon is just there on his horse alone, and there's such a sadness to it. They linger on it for a couple beats too long, and it breaks your heart just watching. And Tim Van Patten is sort of really good with these sort of moments, especially with Jon Snow. I don't know why, but he seems to have a real love of showing this with Jon Snow. But it's a great little moment. But let's move on. Maybe let's go over to Essos, and we talked about the first time Dany and Drago had sex. We should talk about the second time, because it's very different, both from the novel and from the first time on the series. I say very different. It's
the same as it is in the novel. Wait. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit confused. The first or second time that she
has sex with Drago.
In this episode or period?
No, period. What appears to be the second time.
The first time in this episode.
So the first time in this episode, which was at, what did I say before? Around 25 minutes into the episode. We see Drago taking Dany from behind. She has an obviously pained look on her face. She is not enjoying this at all. And the camera slightly zooms in on her face so we can register her pain. Then it makes this sort of and it's the sort of old convention of rape narratives in which the rape victim is seen to kind of focus in on, and I'll put up a screenshot of her unhappiness, and then it's that old narrative of they're not happy with the situation, and they try to put themselves into another place, and it's very significant that the place that Dany goes is, and I've already skipped over it. There we go. Zooms in on her eggs. That's what she fixates on.
Right. As
she feels she's being raped.
That's her happy place.
And then, as soon as she does that, when you go out, the expression on her face is distinctly different.
Right.
She has a sly smile, and we're going to talk about the politics of what's going on in the representation of the Dothraki in a moment. But before we do that, because I'm trying to slip my argument in before Steve gets a chance to make his, I'm going to say that this is not her partaking of any sort of cultural assimilation. I think this is her fixating on the eggs and believing that she has a power greater than anything that she's around. Her happy place is her growing awareness of the coming importance of these eggs and what she will be able to do with them.
Right, but to counter-argue to that, I think it is significant that at the end of this episode, when Dany actually manages to achieve some level of consensuality in her relationship, that in the very next episode she's suddenly wearing Dothraki clothing, and can order the Khalasar to stop, and now has blood riders who are protecting her from her abusive brother, whereas she starts this episode in clearly unsuitable, her still in her wedding dress. She's, bleeding from her palm. She's clearly not suited to be in this place. And what's strange is that in the books, what they've done is they've split one chapter in half, so that there's one scene about her dealing with Drogo, and there's another scene about her dealing with Viserys. And in the books, it's presented in one chapter where Dany is learning about Dothraki culture. She's learning to speak the language. She's learning how to ride a horse all day, every day. She changes her clothing. And when she finally has, that last sex scene with Drogo, where, she actually manages to get eye contact, it's different in the books. In the book, she's having sex with him outside, and people are watching her. And there is a cultural importance to that because, one, this is, in Dothraki culture, all things that are of value, that could have honor or goodness, have to be observed by the Khalasar out in the open. That's why the Dothraki do not have houses, and why they view people who have houses as untrustworthy. Is that, things must be seen so that they can be assessed by the collective. And that, by having sex with Drogo out in the open, she makes herself now visibly the Khaleesi. And it's also the moment at which her child is conceived.
And I get that and understand, but if we just look,
okay, but hold on,
at how that second, but how that second sex scene begins in the series.
Yes, I know. The series completely jettisons.
But wait, but
is what I'm saying.
You're talking over my eggs. People can't see my eggs. See the eggs,
see your eggs,
and then we pan up her body, and this is the initiation of the third sex scene between the two. And why I think that's significant is because, it's sort of marking, at least for the series, that the assimilation might be an act predicated upon her knowledge of superior firepower, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Except that she doesn't have that, right? She does not know magic.
Yeah, but she keeps smiling at those eggs.
Yeah, I know, which is something that the show has invented to kind of signpost to the reader that these eggs are going to turn magical. But at that moment, she's really obsessing about these eggs, which to her are just a symbol of her nature as a Targaryen and a dragon. That it's a source of worth for her as an individual. Not that she thinks that she can turn them into dragons. So that doesn't really fit. So the second point of what I'm getting at is that at the same time that she learns how to kind of speak the language of Dothraki to Drogo and to the Khalasar, at the same time, she is learning how to deal with Viserys in a completely different way. That as she puts on Dothraki clothing, he's still wearing the same unsuitable clothing that he was wearing at the wedding, and it's getting dirty, and he looks pathetic, and
we'll talk about this at length the next time when we get to Lord Snow, because that's a scene that's really important for me too. It's a
and the fact that, for example, and we'll talk about this more next episode, but that when he loses his horse, next episode, he doesn't understand what that means, and Dany does, and that's why she has power over him. And what's kind of interesting about the book is that it fuses these two processes. That Dany gains a measure of power through her understanding of a different culture that is presented as complex, possessing of a deep kind of, anthropological structures, etc., which is completely lacking in the show. And that is, I think, a genuine loss. I don't know how you could have done it, given the time constraints and the the need for narrative economy, but that is a part of Danny's storyline that gets excised, so that instead there's a through line about the eggs and the dragons.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, if you hadn't read the books, you would think that you would read it the way, at least I would think you would read it the way that I am. The sort of argument of the visuals is that her willingness to enter into Dothraki culture is a function of her coming awareness of the significance of these eggs that she's been given. I mean, that's what, in sort of classic, film fashion, the eggs are becoming important, not just functioning as symbols of power, but they're slowly becoming physical objects whose importance will manifest itself over the course of coming episodes. But we could agree to disagree about that, because I don't think we're actually disagreeing.
I'm just disagreeing about what the content of what has been lost in the transition of mediums. And
any adaptation is going to have lots of problems. So moving on a little bit, we've you talked about it. You called it CSI Winterfell.
Yeah.
You had this sort of terrible moment of narrative economy where Catelyn visits the tower from which Bran fell, finds the long blonde hair. Then we have the sort of the round table in front of the tree where Catelyn is saying all these things, and it's the first moment Rob's like, all right, we're going to go to war, right? I mean, he says, it's like, we're going to go to war, and the next thing you hear is Theon saying, I'm right behind you, like, I got your back, let's go to war. Crap, right? I mean, it's this moment where we're seeing future relations that, but the one other thing that when I was, after Theon declares his fealty, they cut to Catelyn's reaction shot, which is like, what the fuck? No, wait, this is a worse idea.
If I can borrow a leaf out of your book, is that, in her discussion, in her discussions here, Catelyn is clearly in charge. She's shot from below, which makes her look taller than everyone, and then the other shots are shot from above, as if it's her looking down on them. One of the things that I do think we do gain in adaptation is that, while Rob wants to do something about this, where he says, what's the line? They come into my house and try to murder my brother. If it's war they want, and then Theon jumps in and says, I'll stand beside you if it comes to that. And then kind of it's Lewin who steps in and says, no, we don't want to fight a war right now.
Tree. Yeah.
Yeah, and Catelyn says, and then Catelyn says, I'm going to take charge and go to King's Landing, and brushes aside Rob's attempt to sort of try to step up and take that responsibility.
There always needs to be a start
when he tells her that she shouldn't.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right.
It's a good moment for Catelyn. What I will say is that Rob is better in this moment in the show than he is in the books, because in the books we have the appearance of what I call dumb Rob, where he starts pulling out his sword and waving it around. And I'm really glad they decided not to do that.
Because
honestly,
does that.
In order to I think the visual of him, pulling out his sword and waving it around, people have right now. It's even, borderline, some people think of Rob as, a tragic figure who, was the good guy who failed. And then there's other people who are like, no, he was an idiot. He got what was coming to him. So, my feeling is, in order for a TV audience to to make the connection to Robb that you need to make in order for season 3 to work. You have to tone down the dumb Robb of a Game of Thrones.
Well, you have to. They did this in part just by virtue of aging him. He's not the 15-year-old.
He's more
kid.
mature.
And you know, I think it's a function of you just looking at him. He doesn't look like a 15-year-old kid who's going to wave his sword around, but his words are, and the exchange with Theon, if it comes to that, and I'll stand beside you. I mean, these are sort of the immature reactions of.
Well, I mean, at the same time, you know, he says he's not saying, you know, I'm going to go to war with him over this. He says, if they want war. It's a more measured reaction than in the book. It's, you know, a wrong has been done to this an insult has been done. You know, compare this to, say, Tywin Lannister, right? I mean, imagine what Tywin Lannister would do if someone, you know, had come to Casterly Rock and tried to kill one of his kids and been stopped.
Yeah.
You know, he would have started, you know, a war over it. And, you know, people, their treatment of Tywin Lannister, or I should say their reaction to Tywin Lannister's, you know, political behavior, this is usually seen as a good thing, that Tywin Lannister doesn't take shit from anybody, and that's a big part of the power of the Lannisters, is that they will go all Reigns of Castamere on you. But they seem to have different standards when it comes to the Starks.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing I'll say about this scene in particular is that it's a moment where you can see fractures arising between these characters, between Robb and Catelyn, between Robb and Theon in his moment of over-enthusiastic fealty. Like he's trying too hard.
And well,
we all knew that kid, or were that kid growing up.
It's not just that it's overwhelming fealty. It's overwhelming fealty in topics around war. That a big part of Theon's character, especially in the books, is he's pretty damn bloodthirsty, right? We don't get in the show the bit where he kicks a head around. Yeah. But you know, Theon likes killing things. Theon likes fighting. You know, and that's part of what makes Catelyn and some of the other Starks not really like him. That they think that there's something a little bit not right with this kid.
Yeah. And speaking of not right, I'm going to put this on the screen share for those of you listening. It's 37:20. We're moving to the next scene, and this is the very tender moment between Catelyn, who is now leaving, and Bran, who is asleep. And just watch how creepy this is. She kisses him on the forehead. It's a tender moment between a mother and a son. 4 seconds now this kiss has been going on. We're zooming in on Bran's face. It's a beautiful, tender moment. And then suddenly we're somewhere else in a tent. And there's a woman touching another woman's face, saying you must look in his eyes always. Love comes in at the eyes.
Yeah.
Holy crap! What were they thinking with that edit to move from tender motherly affection for her comatose son to teach me how to please my wild stallion of a husband? I mean, it's part of the show that I don't think really can be defended, and hopefully they're going to mature away from it a little bit. I don't think it necessarily needs defending. I mean, I think it's part of a function of the problem of narrative economy we've been talking about. But it's just this slipped by someone. Like, someone should have pointed out that maybe we shouldn't, you know, juxtapose tenderly caresses from mother and to son.
On the other hand, you know, it's not like creepy sexuality isn't a part of the content matter of Game of Thrones.
I mean, and even in the scene with Dany and the slave she has essentially ordered her to.
No.
Well, she asked, but
Yeah. Well,
it's
sorry.
still,
I was more going to point out. This is a slave that was bought for her, but that, in a sense, still belongs to Viserys, as he will point out later.
yeah. But she
And
still made a
which of them
request
would you-
for it.
Yeah, but which of them would you say is the more dominant at this moment?
Well, clearly, and I mean, the visuals sort of tell it all.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ! I mean, we're back with the Trayvon Martin trial now. Who's on top of whom? Yeah,
That's the worst in hell. Oh God.
Sorry, it's in my head because
Okay.
all that's ever on. But no, because in the trial they kept talking about whoever's on top was obviously in power. I don't think that's necessarily the case. That in either in that trial or in film generally, that the person on top is the person who is in power. In this case, I think it works. But in other cases, and I'm thinking of the sort of the famous photography scene in Blow Up, where the photographer is on top, underneath, behind, around, but he's clearly dominant no matter where he is, even when he's prone underneath her. He's still in control of that moment. That's sort of what I was getting at, that we can't just assume whoever's on top is in power.
All right. I'm just saying I think the relationship between one person who has been sold
and
another person who has been sold, I think is tricky. Okay, let me see. What are some other stuff? Oh, I did want to talk a little bit about Eddard and Robert on the road.
Yeah.
Or, as some people have put it, Bro King hanging out. Just because, he's introduced in this episode literally pissing on a tree while everyone is watching him. And then
he's got a little Dothraki in him.
Yeah, and then goes to the buffet. So one of the things that you don't quite get in the show from the book is, Eddard clearly does not like or trust the Lannisters, and he will find out at the end of this episode why he should not like or distrust the Lannisters. But in this bit in the books, part of the reason why Eddard is not getting along with Robert very much at this moment, that is isolated from the question of well, it's not isolated. From the question of Daenerys, and what should be done about Daenerys, is that Eddard is someone profoundly shaped by what happened in Robert's Rebellion. And in the scene when they're talking about what to do about Daenerys, he is thinking about how Robert reacted to having murdered children put in front of him when the previous ruling family was nearly wiped out. And his rationale for why he doesn't trust the Lannisters is that it was the Lannisters who put those bodies in front of Robert. And when Eddard was the one who came into King's Landing ahead of Robert, because Robert was wounded at the time, and rode his horse into the throne room, much like Tywin does at the end of season 2. He sees Jaime sitting on the throne.
Yes.
And there is a real question mark about, and keep in mind, there's no alliance between the Lannisters and the Starks and Baratheons at this point in time. So, he had every reason to believe that the Lannisters were making a play for the throne. And in this meeting, what he is also discussing with Robert, and I'm sorry, this is going to get really boring fictional politics here for a second, but bear with me. Jon Arryn, the Hand of the King, has died. Jon Arryn, in addition to being Hand of the King, was Lord of the Eyrie, but was also Warden of the East. And Warden is a royal military title, which essentially means that you are automatically General-in-Chief of any and all forces in your quadrant of the kingdom, and that you can call upon lords to raise armies for you in the name of the king, that you automatically outrank those lords when it comes to who's in charge in a battle, and that you're responsible for certain military threats to the nation. So Eddard Stark is Warden of the North. That means that he outranks every other lord as far as being Lord of the North. And it means that he's responsible for, if wildling invasions bypass the wall, that he's the man on the spot. Jon Arryn is the Warden of the East, which means he's responsible for any invasion over the Narrow Sea between Westeros and Essos. And in the books, at this moment, Robert Baratheon has just given wardenship of the East over to Jaime Lannister. And the Lannisters are already wardens of the West, which means they now potentially could command half of the military forces of the kingdom. And Eddard is trying to make this argument to Robert, you shouldn't do this. This is way too much power to be handing to one family. And especially in Eddard's mind, and this is the argument he makes to Robert, it's too much power to be given to one family who clearly have ambitions on the throne themselves. And Robert kind of blows him off. And as we'll see later in this episode, Robert will blow him off again when Eddard appeals to his better judgment. And this kind of sets up the difficult your command, political situation that Eddard is in.
And
Eddard and Robert doesn't answer.
Yeah, he storms off as if he did not.
There's literally a vacuum of royal power. There's a silence where a command should be.
And we're talking about the trial of we'll just say of Arya, for lack of a better. Arya is the one on trial for wounding and humiliating Joffrey, right at that point. But continue with.
No, that was it. I was.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. No, I did remember something that I'd forgotten. Never mind. Another
I know you had
kind of completely technical. Another completely technical political point. Another topic that's discussed at this meeting is that Jon Arryn's son, Robert, or Robin in the show, the little, breastfeeding kid, is going to be, was supposed to be fostered with the Lannisters. And Eddard also finds this troubling, that, fostering is a sign of trust between noble houses, but it's also kind of a hostage situation that's been sort of legally formalized, and it also allows you to kind of influence someone's upbringing. That, Eddard was fostered by Jon Arryn, and Jon Arryn was the one who taught him that, honor is the most important thing in the world. And there is a story about who was supposed to foster Robert Arryn that has huge consequences for later on in the series. I'm not going to go into spoilers, but just to say, this is a plot line that has been dropped from the show completely, and it's a bit of a pity, because the reveal is quite impressive.
It is. I think, though, to loop back in terms of the show's kind of commitment to its portrayal of Ned in these first two episodes, it's a very strange thing to start producing your most sympathetic character as someone who has killed two very sympathetic figures now in 2 episodes. First he kills poor Will, and at the end of this one,
kills a dog.
He has to kill Lady, an innocent pup who did nothing, but who Cersei has demanded puppy blood, and so there must be puppy blood. And it's another example of Ned of building him up in the audience's eyes as the character in whom you can trust his judgment. Even though over the course of the season we're going to see that if we trust in Ned's judgment, it leads to terrible places. And as you say, like, Ned's a lot more honorable than he is bright, I guess, is the best way to.
Well, except that here I'm going to stick up for Ned because as I argue on Race for the Iron Throne, Ned is a lot smarter than people give him credit for. It's all in his internal monologue, and that he sometimes will do things that he recognizes is not smart because in many ways he is compelled. And one thing I do want to bring up that I always find funny is that this is also the episode in which Micah dies.
Yeah.
But no one besides Arya actually cares about Micah, right? A human child has been brutally murdered.
Hunted down.
Because he's a peasant, and a nobleman accused him of a crime, and no one really cares about that, but they feel really bad that a dog got killed. And, I don't know, I judge people for that.
I mean, we don't have to get into the Sarah McLachlan, ASPCA commercials and talk about how puppies appeal to human emotion. I mean, even my crack about puppy blood is sort of meant to make that appeal. But it's the language at which that Ned even uses. He says, "You rode that boy down." Right? It's not that he killed him and executed him the way that Ned has executed both Will and Lady. It's that he rode him down like an animal, like. Whereas Ned treated an animal the same way he treated a human. So we're starting to.
It's
so
even
I can
more
see,
kind of gruesome in the books. In the books, like in writing him down, Sandor literally cuts him into pieces that have to be stuck in a bag.
Yeah. And the reason that has to be done is in part because of. I mean, Micah was a witness to Joffrey's probably the greatest humiliation, and this is a good way to sort of round out the podcast and the episode, to Joffrey's greatest humiliation, which was when he yells, right, Arya smacks Joffrey, who has a sword, Arya and Micah who have sticks, right? And we're going to see this dynamic reappear later in the season, where Arya is armed with a stick, or someone is armed with a stick, against Lannisters with swords. This is a sort of that in short, and part of the reason I believe Syria might still be alive. But I know you hate that theory, but there's, this is a great moment where, Joffrey says in what will become his trademark kind of, I'm trying to be evil voice. I won't hurt you much. And that's when Arya smacks him on the back with a stick.
Yeah.
He falls down. He yells, I'll gut you, you little cunt. And then Nymeria...
It's like the mask has come off.
Yeah, but Nymeria, who would not fetch gloves earlier in the episode because other people were around.
And who was not anywhere near...
No, nowhere near.
People in that scene just appears.
Nymeria hears someone call Sansa a little cunt.
Calls Arya.
And Arya, a little cunt, and appears out of nowhere, takes down Joffrey. Arya pulls Nymeria off Joffrey, and then Arya makes Joffrey beg for his life.
Yeah.
She holds the sword now. She puts it to his head, and that's probably her biggest mistake. Because it's not the general circumstances that make the trial necessary or make it necessary for the Hound to ride Micah down. What makes it necessary is he's a witness to this very substantial humiliation.
Yeah, which is interesting
Joffrey.
Because it's slightly different in the books. In the books, first of all, Joffrey is I'm going to say a little bit less obviously pathetic. He kind of has this sort of date rapey frat boy kind of vibe in this chapter because he's trying to get Sansa drunk.
This harkens back to what we talked about in season 3, or what you talked about in season 3 about this is the second time a Lannister has walked up to Sansa with a glass of wine and said, "Don't worry, you're safe with me."
Yeah, and then like when he goes after Arya with a sword, in the books he's really trying to kill her.
Yeah.
So the part of what has to get hushed up is the fact that Joffrey is such an unhinged personality that he nearly commits murder of his betrothed's sister. I mean, something that could set off a crime. Yeah,
he is
revealed to be this.
Yes, but he is quite pathetic, as those of you watching can see. This shot, and it went from a medium close up, zoomed in on his face as he begs for his life. Yeah. This is Arya's mistake. I mean, by the way,
if you really want to see a have your mind kind of not process something, you should check out. There's a set of GIFs on Tumblr going around, which is Jack Gleason like cuddling with his bulldog puppy, and it's the cutest thing you've ever seen. But the face is Joffrey, so it's really weird.
Yeah, I don't think I could take that. Oh wait, hold on, I'm a dog. Wait, there we go. I'm a person again. Okay. Sorry for those of you listening. I fast forwarded on the show, and I was a dog for a second. Yeah, I mean, poor Jack Gleason. I mean, even that thing that I linked to ages ago, where we see his only real prior acting experience in Batman Begins, where he's the little kid on the window ledge.
Yeah.
And he's like, the other kids won't believe me, and Batman hands him, and then, they add some commentary. Just make sure you do something good with your life, kid, and cut to Joffrey. I will. It's like,
yeah.
You feel for him. He's, although I can't feel too sorry for him. He makes lots of money and is quite young, plenty of time to invest.
I think it's more that he's going to become a PhD in philosophy and Hebrew. So
Really, what is it with these kids? They're James Franco. I have a friend who's James Franco's dissertation advisor.
And God help that poor guy.
No. He's enamored of him, and Franco actually flew him out to Michigan when he was on set filming, I think, one of the Faulkner. I don't know why they're filming something from Faulkner in Michigan, but one of his Faulkner movies, flew him out there for a dissertation meeting. I mean, Franco is a committed student, but then you have Natalie Portman, who's a neuroscientist, or these kids with doing the right things with their wealth.
Yeah.
Philosophy in Hebrew, that's weird.
So, one thing I did want to talk about a little bit. How are we on time?
I can edit it down, or I can do something. I figured out how to compress things, so
okay.
I think we should be fine.
I just really want to say one of the things that's missing as a presence from this episode is Renly Baratheon, and the Renly Baratheon from the books, who is basically, if Robert is the fat Elvis, Renly is young Elvis, with all of the ambiguous sexuality and brightly colored costumes that entails. And the interesting thing about Renly's presence is that he kind of, by just being there, shows that, one, Stark is not politically isolated, that there are powerful factions at court who do not like the Lannisters, and, it also sort of subtly changes the dynamic between Robert and his son, that in the trial scene, in the books, Renly just breaks down laughing at Joffrey when he finds out that Joffrey named his sword Lion's Tooth and then got it chucked in the river by a child. And Robert kind of tells the guards to take his brother away because he's obviously not feeling well. And you get the sense that Robert in that moment is kind of embarrassed by his brother showing him up. Whereas in the show, it's much more about Robert feeling a sense of disgust and shame in his unmanly son, which, is certainly there, and part of, Joffrey's inferiority complex, which drives a lot of his actions. But I did kind of miss that Renly. And in a way, I think it would have been a little bit more interesting to show a butch Renly and then reveal him to be explicitly gay, and something of the more passive partner in the relationship.
I
think
think
that would have been interesting.
I think it would have been, but as I sort of said earlier, that scene is already so crowded. I mean, you literally have Ilyn Payne standing next to Ned Stark, standing next to Arya, standing next to, they part the seas to bring Sansa in. It's already, there are too many people, there are too many players on the stage at that moment, I guess is the best way to put it. And I can see why, in the interest of even visual economy, why they couldn't put another significant face up there. It's sort of like the classic difference between comic books and comic book movies when they involve teams like the X-Men or the Avengers, that in the comics there are constantly scenes of like 15 people in a single panel all sort of talking over each other. But you never get that.
In ways that don't make sense.
Yeah, but you never get that in the films because it would just be, it would be too difficult for the viewer to keep up with. The one other thing that I think we should cover, and I actually don't know what I want to say about this, so I'll probably just throw it to you.
Okay.
The conversation between Cersei and Catelyn about Cersei's dead child who resembled Robert. That struck me as...
I hate that.
Go on.
I mean, I think it's, in terms of the innovations for the show, I think it doesn't work. It's absolutely kind of antithetical to Cersei's character in a really important way that I won't get into because of spoilers. But, I mean, I do like the idea in the show that, there was an attempt at one point to make the relationship work.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, like, to understand Cersei's metaplot and her mission for the last 15 years of her life is, completely incompatible with those actions. This, this isn't really a spoiler because this character does, that child does not exist in the books, but in the books she has that child aborted. Specifically because it's Robert's. And I don't know how more significant a change you can make. And it's also, it's weird that she's showing up, on the one hand to see, to sort of see if the kid's gonna dead, to kind of poke him a little bit. But why she's trying to be nice to Catelyn is really kind of like, there is softening Cersei to make her more of a three-dimensional human being, and then there's like dropping a completely different character into Lena Headey's script and having her act that.
And that's sort of what I was thinking. That was one of the moments in the episode that I think people complain about, where characters just seem to be acting out of character in ways that seem inexplicable. Well, I guess we've finished traveling along the Kingsroad. I hope you've enjoyed this. It's been another Lawyers, Guns, and Money Game of Thrones podcast, because that's what we do at Lawyers, Guns, and Money, Game of Thrones podcasts. We hope you enjoyed. I'm Scott Eric Kaufman.
Bye-bye.
Steve Attewell. We will see you next week.